do we have?
Five, four, three, two, one. We are live. Coming to you live as Lichtman Live. Say what's up to the people, Dad.
We're in the home stretch. 1 week to go, although that's a misnomer. I think over 50,000 voters already cast their ballots by mail or in early voting. That's about a third
50
of,
million. You said 50,000. You mean 50
oh,
million.
well, you got to give me a little, leeway for being old and doddering. Yes,
Right,
50 million,
right.
50,000, every hour. That's about a third or so of the total, and it keeps growing. I suspect in, the quote unquote swing states, at least half, maybe more of the votes will be cast early by mail or at early voting sites. So the idea, of election day isn't what it used to be.
No doubt. But it seems to me like as we get closer and closer, the election anxiety is getting to a fever pitch. Just in my personal life, what I'm seeing on the internet, it seems like a lot of people are getting election anxiety.
No question. There was more election anxiety this year than I've ever seen. And I go back to Kennedy Nixon in 1960. I actually saw Kennedy when I was 13 in New York City. And statements about his charisma are not overstated. He blew us away. He was amazing. We were just kids. And I've never seen this kind of election anxiety because, a lot of people believe that the future of the country is on the line here and that, democracy in America could be a thing of the past, depending upon how this election works out. And I don't think that's an illegitimate fear. Plus, we've talked about this, right? I think I did a 1 minute on it. The media frenzy. And what's the media frenzy all about, Sam?
Polls, polls, polls. And all the headlines
Yeah,
today that I saw all said the race is neck and neck, that they're tied. So if you're just reading those headlines and going off those polls, and either side, you'd be anxious right now because according to them, it's a neck and neck race.
exactly. But what doesn't change, Sam?
The keys to the White House.
The keys to the White House do not change. They are not based on polls, punditry, or campaign events. They are based on the fundamental forces that drive elections, and that is votes up or down on the strength and performance of the party holding the White House. In other words, collectively, at least, the American electorate is smart, or at least has been for the last 160 years, making the very pragmatic decision: does the party holding the White House merit 4 more years of not or not? And that's really mostly what the keys tap into.
How are you feeling, Dad? Are you anxious?
I've been doing this for 42 years, and every 4 years I have butterflies in my stomach. This year, I think I have a flock of crows in my stomach. Of course, I'm anxious, not because of the polls, but primarily because I'm so worried about the future of our election. I think I've said this before. Democracy is precious, but like all precious things, it can be destroyed. For the vast sweep of human history, there has been almost no democracy. Peoples were governed by the divine right of kings, by right of birth, or by the sword and blood. Democracy is a very recent development. When the first golden age of democracy was, Sam?
The Greeks.
No,
Oh,
right after World War One,
oops.
when we had 24 democracies out of almost nothing. By the 1940s, that was cut more than in half. Then the second great golden age of democracy was the late 20th century. And throughout the 21st century, democracy has been in sharp decline all over the world. Today, the vast majority of the world's peoples do not live in a functioning democracy, and democracies typically die from within, not from conquest. And how do they die? When you don't take seriously what a would-be authoritarian says what they are going to do. I never compare anyone to Hitler, and I'm not doing that now, but I am talking about how democracy died in Germany. That is, particularly the big business folks said, oh, Hitler doesn't really mean any of those things he's saying. You know, he's not going to do that to the Jews. The Jews are law-abiding, peaceful, contributing members of society. He's just saying these things, you know, to appeal to the people. We'll have him under control, and we can use him to keep us from falling victim to the commies and the socialists. And we all know what the result of that was. You've got to take this with the greatest seriousness because it is real, and historically, this is exactly how democracies fall. Now, nothing has changed to change my prediction that I made on September 5th, deliberately before the supposed pivotal Trump-Harris debate, according to the pundits, which proved to be not pivotal one bit if you believe the polls, because I wanted to make clear the big message of the keys. It's governing, not campaigning, that counts. And I have been asked continuously by email, and you know, I do 5 to 10 interviews a day, and getting pretty tired, uh, and it's getting on the nerves of our family. I've been continually asked, you know, have things changed? You're going to change your keys? And of course, the answer is no. The biggest myth in American politics is the October surprise. I've always issued my predictions before then and never changed them. What is the biggest October surprise of recent years? The Access Hollywood tape in October of 2016. We've never seen a candidate come close to bragging openly about sexually assaulting women. You know, Herman Cain, probably forgot him, a businessman who was a serious candidate for the Republican nomination. 3 women, no proof, accused him of harassment. He was gone. Didn't change my prediction in 2016. I'm not going to change it now. If anything, what's come out has been negative, not positive, for Donald Trump. What do you make of that Madison Square Garden rally, Sam?
It seemed full of people saying a lot of horrific stuff. I don't think it's
Well,
going to change the election.
I'm not saying it will, but the last thing you want to do as your closing argument for the election is flagrantly insult and denigrate a critically important voting group. The Latino voting group is now even larger than the Black voting group. It is the largest minority voting group in the country, and there are lots of Latinos in Pennsylvania and other swing states. And to say, you know, Puerto Rico is a pile of garbage is certainly some of the biggest malpractice, maybe the biggest malpractice I have ever seen in a campaign.
But he
And you
didn't
got to
say, but
remember,
Trump didn't say it. It was a comedian.
doesn't matter. It's Trump's rally. It's Trump's
You think this
person.
is the biggest malpractice in no, come on, that's ridiculous.
What's bigger? Well, there may be some, but it's
There's
pretty big.
bigger.
And here's why it's so big, because Latinos are a critical swing vote in the swing states. Plus, Latinos don't, excuse me, Puerto Ricans don't live in isolated communities. You know, Puerto Ricans live here. They are thoroughly integrated into the vastly larger Latino population, includes Mexicans, people from South America, Central America. Puerto Ricans are married to other Latinos. They live next door to other Latinos. They have relatives who are other Latinos. And so this hate that was spewed against Latinos, against Puerto Ricans rather, is not limited to the Puerto Rican community. It's going to spread, I think, to the most large, most substantial minority voting bloc in the United States. Do you ever hear this guy, Bad Bunny, Sam?
Yes.
Supposedly, he has 45 million followers. I find that a little hard to believe. You think that's true?
Yes, he's like one of the biggest artists on the planet, like
And
music.
he just came out against Trump. He had been, you know, politically neutral. And a bunch of other major artists and figures on the Latino scene have come out against Trump. I'm not saying this affects the election, but this wasn't the only hate spewed out. This guy talked about, one of the worst stereotypes of African Americans, African Americans eating watermelon. Donald Trump himself, once again, issued perhaps the worst slur historically that has been used against Black people to keep them oppressed, and that is they're stupid, they're dumb, they're lazy. He repeated that again. That justified slavery, it justified Jim Crow, and it is extraordinary that in this day and age, a candidate would repeat that historically reprehensible slur. Stephen Miller talked about America for Americans. Remember what the Nazis said, Germany for the Germans. In other words, it's only us pure blood people. Remember, Donald Trump said immigrants are poisoning the blood of the country. One speaker implied that Kamala Harris was a prostitute, talking about her pimp. And, you know,
But
Tucker
Dad,
Carlson.
I gotta stop you. I gotta stop you because Trump and his allies and his comrades have been saying this stuff for 8 years. I don't think, you know,
Never so prominently
I
and
don't know.
never
I don't buy
quite
it.
this extreme against Puerto Ricans
Well,
as a
yeah,
specific target. And it just, they tried to disavow it. But all this other stuff, I know they've been saying that for a long time, just shows what he said about Puerto Ricans was not an anomaly, but is consistent, as you say, with what Trump and his followers have been spreading for so many years. And at the same time, we had General Kelly, who Trump denigrates now as a lowlife, a four-star general, a staunch conservative, saying Trump had positive things to say about Hitler, wanted generals like Hitler's generals. Remember, these generals ran mobile killing squads that machine gunned hundreds of thousands of Jews, targeting women and children because the order was to wipe Jews off the face of the earth. These are the generals that Donald Trump wants. But let's turn to something more concrete.
wait, I want to say something. I
Yeah.
just feel like this is such a losing strategy that people on the left and Democrats keep using. They keep attacking Trump for his rhetoric, his vile comparisons, et cetera, et cetera. They've been doing it for so long, and it's not working. Obviously, it's not working.
We don't
So
know if it's working or not because all the polls
one
are
of two
pointing.
candidates left. I mean, it's not working very well if it's working.
Well, we don't know. But if you listen to Harris's speech, she did go through some of this, but most of her speech was very positive. What I'm going to do for the American people, compared to Donald Trump, who only wants to do things for himself. She had a very telling line. When Donald Trump enters the White House, if he wins, he's going to have an enemies list. If I enter the White House, when I win, I'm going to have a to-do list. And she talked a lot about the positive things that she was going to do. But I fundamentally disagree with you. As I said, it is not paying enough attention, not calling out the outrages of a would-be authoritarian that historically has led to authoritarianism gaining its grip on the country. We've got to call it out. We can't let it go. Remember my old saying, it's not just the evil people who wreak havoc on this world, it's the good people who don't do enough to stop them. And a prime example of that, and I'm crying my eyes out about the decline of a once great newspaper, the Washington Post, the prime example of a supposedly good person playing right into the hands of authoritarianism is Jeff Bezos, who killed after decades of the Washington Post endorsing and the Washington Post endorsing and lots of other races killed the presidential endorsement, which of 11 days before the election, which of course he's not stupid. He knew Trump would jump on this as a tacit endorsement of Trump. And that's exactly what Trump did. He said, oh my God, even the liberal Washington Post hates Kamala Harris so much that they won't even endorse her. He had to know that. And I am among 200,000 former subscribers who've canceled my subscription to the Washington Post. I just will not support Jeff Bezos anymore. And, his crocodile tears. Oh, this has nothing to do with my business. I didn't know that one of my companies was meeting with Donald Trump. I'm not afraid of what utter nonsense. We know that he's scared stiff that Donald Trump is going to hit him in his pocketbook if Donald Trump wins. It's so sad. But let's turn to what we do know. Not the polls, Sam, but the early voting. Can you get that up?
Yes. One moment, please. Let me get that up.
I'm going to get it up too so I can see it.
Of course, I don't disagree with you that I think you need to call Trump out. I just don't. At what point do we try something else? You know what I mean? I don't know.
But we're trying something else, but we can't abandon that. Her speech, I thought, was a good combo. Didn't fire up the base, but that's not what it was trying to do. It was appealing to the so-called still persuadable swing voters.
All right, I've got it
But if
up.
you don't call it out, you normalize it.
I hear
And
that.
there's been too much normalization of it.
I agree. I mean, don't get me wrong. I totally thought the rhetoric was vile, but it's been vile since the moment he stepped down that golden escalator.
But it's gotten worse, way worse. We haven't seen anything like what he's talked about this year, using the American military against U.S.
I
citizens,
agree. It's worse.
scaling
Yes.
all his political opponents, being a dictator on day one to drill, drill, drill. You know, as much as I didn't like him in 2016 or 2020, it's much worse today. Plus, you have Project 2025 where 140 former staffers for Trump worked on the idea. I don't know anything about it.
Yeah, but
And
I
that
look.
was
I
a
agree with.
blueprint.
Here's my issue too: is you just go down these lists and you just list and list and list. I just don't think it's effective, and I don't think it works to sway people. I think your average person is hearing these lists about Trump and they don't give a crap. I'm
And
just.
then, let's just abandon the country. If people don't care that we're about to lose our democracy,
He could
then
get.
nothing else
He
is
could
going
get.
to matter.
I agree with you, but he could get 60 million, 70 million votes. That's
If he
just
gets
the
70
reality of
million
the
votes, he's going to
situation.
lose big time. And remember, this is different. As I said, it's much worse than 2016 or 2020. And that's reflected in all the hate I've been getting. I didn't get it previously, all this scurrilous, vulgar, violent, threatening hate. Wasn't close until this time. This time is different.
I
It's not
agree.
the same.
I agree. I just don't know if it's working.
Well, who knows? I mean, there's no way to tell, but you got to try. All
Okay.
right, early voting.
Yes.
I think more telling than the attempt to parcel out Democrat, Republican, Independent. And by the way, let me repeat, I thought Harris struck the right balance. Yes, she went after Trump, but more of her speech was about the positive things that she was going to do. So I don't think Harris is just, going
Right.
after Trump. I think she's doing the right thing. And
Right.
I don't advocate just going after Trump. Absolutely. You've heard me scream for decades about the need for candidates to put forth vision,
Right.
substance, and a positive agenda.
Yeah.
Any rate, I think more indicative than party registration is gender. We know there is an enormous gender gap in every state, with double-digit gender gap on both sides. And so I think the most indicative statistic of how the early vote is going, and it's now past 50 million, is gender. So let's look at the swing states. Michigan, 56% women, 44% men. That's huge. Wisconsin, which is confusing on party registration, since most of those who are voting list themselves as independent, 51-43. Pennsylvania, 56-43. So we're talking about anywhere between an 8 and 13-point gap between men and women. And presuming the gender gaps holds, that means a huge advantage in these states. But look at some other states that the polls say may be trending towards Trump. Arizona's close, but it's still plurality women, 48% women, 44% men, 8% unknown. And I bet a lot of those unknowns are transgenders or non-binaries and are certainly more likely to vote Democratic. So let's look at Nevada, if I can find it.
It's
All
45,
right, North
45,
Carolina.
10.
That's more important. North Carolina has cast 3.1 million ballots already.
Wow.
That's likely to be more than half and still going.
Right.
And that's 55 women, 44 men, one of the largest advantages. Here's Nevada. Uh, Nevada's bucks the trend. Nevada is 45% women, 45% men, and 10% unknown. So that's the one state where it does seem to be gender balanced. Arizona, I'm sorry, that's New Mexico. Arizona, slight lead for women, 48-44.
Right.
But a lot of the misguided pundits saying, oh, Republicans are doing better, they're surging. That's true if you look at the nation numbers, not at the swing state numbers, and it ignores the gender numbers, which I think are far more indicative than the registration numbers.
So it doesn't worry you that in a state like Georgia, we've got 49% Republican, 45% Dem, 6%
Of
other?
course it does. But again, let me see what Georgia has on gender, 56-44.
Right. So you're telling people look at the
And a
gender.
lot of independents.
Yeah. So you're saying,
I'm telling people that the independents are going to break very sharply for Harris, that they're probably mostly women.
okay, that's interesting. That's definitely different
Yeah.
than what
I'm not
most.
predicting an election from that, but I'm saying, a lot of the punditry has been really misleading about it,
Right.
focusing on party registration and not on gender. Gender is going to be the most important indicator of results.
And that's not typical, right? Usually gender, nobody looks at gender.
No, there's been a gender gap for some time now,
Okay.
but this is by far the biggest gender gap that we've seen, even bigger than when we had a woman candidate, Hillary Clinton, running.
Right. I mean, because when you're just looking at party registration, you look at Pennsylvania where it's 59-31 Republicans. You look at Michigan where it's
No, no, that's
40.
59-31
That's
Democrat.
what I meant. That's what I meant.
Yeah.
50, 48-41 Republicans in Wisconsin, 41 other, 36 Dems, 23 Republicans. That looks good. But then we start looking at states like Georgia, North
Right,
Carolina,
exactly.
Arizona, Nevada. If you're looking at party registration, it starts to look a little sketchy.
But when you look at Georgia, there's a 12-point gender lead.
Right. All right.
And one has to wonder in North Carolina to what extent the Mark Robinson fiasco, the Republican gubernatorial candidate, will affect the top of the ticket. No way to tell, but you got to really be work a little bit to split your ticket. Most people don't.
Right. Okay.
All right,
Well, if you're right about the gender thing, it's looking amazing for Kamala. So,
at least in the early vote. Now, remember, Republicans do better
right.
election day, but as we talked about previously, you may say you're going to vote, but you got a family, a work emergency, you get sick, it's bad weather, you just get tired. Probably at least 10% of those likely voters on election day are going to fall off.
Right, which is why I think when people are looking at early voting on party registration, they're freaking out because states like Georgia and North Carolina seem impossible to win if you're believing the distribution based off party registration.
Exactly, which can be very misleading because in those states, uh, don't forget the importance of independence.
Yeah.
And Democrats are more less likely to defect to Trump than Republicans are to defect to Harris. I'm not saying there's going to be big traffic either way, but by a few points, I think there'll be more Republican than Democratic defections.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. But the good news is if you're looking just at party registration, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin are all looking good for Kamala, and that's all she really needs. She doesn't need Georgia, North Carolina, and Nevada. I mean, it'll be tight if she doesn't get any of those, but she can win without them.
My count is she'll just be over the top if she wins the three: Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Trump has to win North Carolina and Georgia. If he loses either one, it's pretty much gone.
Right. Yeah. All right, you ready to get us some questions?
I'm always ready. How
Oh,
many
we
viewers?
we got 11,000 people watching, Dad.
That's good, isn't it?
That's very good. Some
And I'm
housekeeping.
happy to take all your questions. I'll even go a little bit over the hour, given how many loyal viewers we have.
Right. Some housekeeping. We only have 1,790 likes, but we have 11,000 people watching. Please like the stream. Subscribe if you're not subscribed. You can follow Allan Lichtman at Allan Lichtman on TikTok and X and at underscore Lichtman on Instagram. Remember that we get tons of questions. We can't answer all of them, but members and donations get priority on non-sponsored streams. All right, Dad.
I'm ready.
You ready to get after it?
I'm ready to get after it. And keep in mind, for all of you out there, the keys have not changed. I know I said that at the beginning, but we get people coming in and out. I just want to stress the prediction remains unchanged for Harris.
Will Elon Musk get away with buying votes in Pennsylvania to help Trump win? Or are you going to lose because of him?
I have no idea. Very hard. It's so unprecedented. He's now been sued. Clearly, what he's doing is absolutely not just reprehensible, but illegal. And he is being sued for it. And I think he'll lose. So I think he may have stopped. I'm not positive. But it's reprehensible that there are a few people like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and Jeff Bezos who are so incredibly rich that as single individuals, they can manipulate what's happening in the country. That's absolutely obscene and tremendously threatening to a democracy. One of the signs of ill health in a democracy is an extreme inequality in the distribution of income and wealth.
Right. Harry Chittenden says democracy isn't perfect, and your comments express the danger of putting voting power in ignorant or dangerous people. Do you like geniocracy? Intellectual merit, expert competence, and morality are valued over popular opinion and political equality.
It's kind of a Platonic Republic idea, the gold people rule. It is incredibly dangerous. While it may seem appealing in the abstract, the problem is who is to define who has the merit to vote. In the early republic, it was only men who had property. And then, of course, it was only white men, women, African Americans, Native Americans, many immigrants were denied the right to vote precisely on the grounds that they lacked at least the intellectual capacity, the independence. And that's exactly my point about Trump by saying Harris is dumb and lazy and mentally deficient. He is recreating all of the old, misleading, misguided arguments for why huge swaths of our people should be denied the right to vote, among other basic rights.
Arash Taheri with a $50 donation. They say, Dr. Lichtman, it's shameful how you're getting blasted over your predictions. My donation is my way of saying thanks for your clarity, honesty, and educational perspective on how elections are decided, whether we like your keys or not. Thank you, Arash.
Absolutely. And I've never been arrogant about it. I always said, I don't have a crystal ball. I'm not Speaker Mike Johnson, who thinks he has a pipeline to the Almighty. My system is based on history. It's very robust, but it's always possible. You can't know it in advance that there'd be something so cataclysmic and so unprecedented to break the pattern of history. It doesn't mean my prediction is invalidated. I really get angry about if you're wrong this time, your whole prediction system has to be thrown out. That's nonsense. I would still have I say, a 10 out of 11 record, which far exceeds any other system.
Right. Fair point. Field Manley says, if the election goes against your prediction, what advice do you give to Americans who want to keep our republic intact?
Keep working, stay organized, keep voting. There are more elections to come. Stay positive, stay educated.
There you go. Jared Klein says, who do you think Harris is going the route of it? Why do you think Harris is going the route of attacking Trump versus pushing all the accomplishments of the last 3.5 years? Or Clarence Thomas likely retiring, or J.D. Vance becoming president if Trump doesn't make it the 4 years? That's kind of what we were talking about earlier, is their
Yeah, no, it's a
strategy.
very good point. But, you know, J.D. Vance, in my view, may be more dangerous than Trump. He shares all of Trump's bigotry, all of Trump's
Well, that's
authoritarianism.
what this guy
Let
is
me
saying.
finish.
I know, but that's what this guy is
Uh,
saying.
yeah, I agree with that. That was my point. But I think he's more dangerous because he's smarter, slicker, and kind of presents a phony, friendly face. And that's another way in which dictatorships take hold. Take a look at the great Sinclair Lewis, the Nobel Prize winner, his novel, It Can't Happen Here.
Philip H. says 9% of registered Republicans said they are voting for Kamala. 3% of Harris supporters say they will vote for Trump. I give +6 to Harris on the polls. What do you think?
I'm not familiar with that poll, but it comports with what Sam and I were saying. Just from what we understand about Republicans and Democrats and where they are right now, that very few Democrats are going to switch to Trump. Not a whole lot of Republicans, but more. And that, I don't know, the validity of the poll or who took it, but it sustains what we've been saying, right, Sam?
Yes. Derek Taylor says there have been rumors that Republican leaning pollsters are juicing up the Trump numbers so that when Kamala Harris wins, they will say it was rigged and stolen. What do you think?
I've heard that, and it wouldn't surprise me one bit. You know, I wrote a book about the rise of the American conservative movement. And of course, one of the figures I studied in depth was not a clear conservative, but one of the most enigmatic figures of our time, Richard Nixon. And that's exactly what they were doing. They were trying to manipulate the polls, although they were trying to manipulate them, like this time in their own favor to create a more bandwagon effect. I have no inside information, but I'm just saying if true, it would not surprise me.
Shay Hendricks says, looking at the NBC early voting data, do you think most of the quote other voters are voting for Harris because many Republicans are voting for her over Trump? Do you think Dems are in good shape on that?
Well, based on the gender numbers, which is all I have to go on, it does look like independents are breaking for Harris, but it also could be more Republicans breaking for Harris. There's no way to parse that out at this point, but the gender numbers certainly do look good.
You're all about these gender numbers, eh, Dad?
Yeah, and particularly since I believe uh, women will be 53 to 55% of the electorate. So even if the gender gap breaks even, Harris still benefits.
Are you drinking water? That's
Imagine that.
that's like 2 streams and now I've seen you drink water.
I know.
That's incredible.
Even an old dog can learn new tricks, right?
I guess so.
You're skeptical.
You look unnatural drinking water to me. I'm so used to seeing you drinking diet soda that when you drink water, it seems strange.
I can go run to the refrigerator and get some diet soda if
No,
it'll
no,
make
no,
you.
no. Stick with the water.
All right.
Travis Douglas says, Professor Lichtman, do you think this wave of Trump support is due in part to the realization that white people will soon be the minority and they are doing anything to keep their grip on power?
Oh, I think that's part of it. And while I haven't personally studied that, others have. And though some of those who looked at Trump supporters have said it's not primarily economic, although that's part of it, but the much bigger issue is cultural, that people are afraid that the white dominated pioneer stock America is changing, is disappearing. And they find some hope in Donald Trump to preserve that old ideal.
Right. Um, let's see here. Member PV Kip 999 says, "How do we stop Mike Johnson? Better yet, how do we stop the Supreme Court from getting away with helping Trump?"
You can't. You can stop Mike Johnson by voting for Democrats for Congress. Nothing you can do about the Supreme Court. I have to say, though, Supreme Court was excellent in the post 2020 period. Excellent by staying away. They just wouldn't listen to any of the bogus arguments that Trump and his allies brought to them. And that included the three Trump appointees, the only ones who even hinted at giving it the time of day. Guess who the two were?
Clarence Thomas, um,
Alito.
Alito.
And even they just said, "We'll consider it." They didn't, and they said, "We'll consider it, but we really aren't going to give them any relief." The other seven said, "We're not even consider these crazy arguments." So I would hope the Supreme Court follows through on that. I
Right,
can't guarantee it, obviously.
right. But then they gave him immunity after that, so that wasn't very
I
good
know, and
either.
they messed up the clause of the Constitution dealing with disqualification, and they overturned Roe versus Wade. Other than that, they really didn't do
Yeah.
much.
But you are right. They were pretty consistent with in terms of election stuff, not touching it. So maybe they'll do that again.
Yeah, there's real danger in their dealing with election stuff, obviously. But hey, they thing about the Supreme Court is who controls them, Sam? Who
Uh,
checks them?
Nobody.
Nobody.
That was a trick question, Dad. It's not fair.
Yeah, I know.
I know.
I have a
Remember,
lot of questions.
I know. Remember Ian.
I've got to train you to take over for me. Oh.
Member Ian Matheru says, "Professor, we know horse race polls are unhelpful. What do you think of national exit polls on election night? Do they have any value? Are they fairly accurate?"
I think they're reasonably accurate. Obviously, there are pretty large errors, but from what I've been able to tell, at least in terms of the pattern of the vote, if not the, actual specific numbers, they pretty well give you a configuration of how people voted.
Nice. Let's see here. Is the early voting on Republican numbers making you any less confident about your prediction?
Absolutely not. My prediction does not waver on that. Plus, as we saw when we looked behind the numbers, much more indicative than the party breakdowns, which are, by the way, quite positive for the Democrats in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, which is all they need. The gender breakdowns are very positive for Democrats. And I don't know why uh, the pundits haven't focused on the gender gap,
It's just not something people usually think about, I guess.
I guess. But that's why you're tuned in to this channel, because we
Hey,
talk about things that people don't normally think about.
you're a smart guy, Dad.
You too, although you flubbed my last question.
Did I? What was it? I don't even remember.
Never mind.
Okay.
Let's move on.
Um, Turkhold in the Occult Orchestra Gen Sec says, "Voted early. I'm worried that even if Trump loses, we're just kicking the ball down the road as Project 2025 will become Project 2029, etc. We'll have to fight another Trump every 4 years. Is that valid?"
That's absolutely reasonable. If Trump flipped out tomorrow, Republican Party wouldn't change a whit. It's now a MAGA party. Another huge mistake the pundits make. Oh, it's the MAGA versus the mainstream Republicans. Have you heard that, Sam?
Yes.
There are no mainstream Republicans anymore, none to speak of. And the few that have been left are leaving. It is now an overwhelmingly majority MAGA party, and it would not change. It might be a little less toxic, a little less extreme, a little less, psychopathic, but the basics of it would not change one bit. I have a book coming out next year, The Truth About Conservatives. It's Not What You Think. Notre Dame University Press, in which I talk about how Trump is no anomaly, but is very much a culmination of 100 years of conservative tradition.
Rosario AH says Trump said Sunday that he and Mike Johnson have a quote little secret. I thought he said that it was Matt Gaetz and him that had a little
No,
secret.
he said it about Mike
Oh,
Johnson.
he
That's
did.
right. Yes.
Rep Dan Goldman suspects it's related to the certification of the election. What do you think?
I suppose it's possible that Republicans in the House could be prepared to vote against certification, but you're not going to get a majority in the Senate, or I think even a majority in the House to do that. But I think that, and the new election law uh, that's taken over from the one from the 1880s really makes that very, very difficult. But I agree, that's probably the scheme that they're working on.
This is a. Didn't you think that was strange though? This whole little secret thing.
I thought it was real strange, but that explanation makes perfect sense to me. Remember, a majority of the Republican caucus in 2020 voted against certifying Pennsylvania.
Right. John C says, Professor, is this rally in New York at Madison Square Garden by Trump the October surprise for Republicans? What do you think? Well, you just said you don't believe in October surprises, right?
I don't believe in October surprise, and obviously it wouldn't change my prediction since it's not positive for Trump, but it's nowhere near the October surprise of the Hollywood Access tape. Not close.
You said earlier that it was the biggest gaffe or the biggest occurrence in
Well,
election
it's a
history.
gaffe. The Access Hollywood tape wasn't a gaffe. It was something from, quite a bit earlier that had been released. And,
Hmm,
you're right. I probably overstated that a bit.
right. Um, Trina LD says, We know Trump is vile. What are we supposed to do about the people that were cheering him on? I've seen this one other time in history. It's scary.
It is scary. And, I just made the point. You can't just point your finger at Trump anymore. It's an entire political movement, which, as Sam said, got 70 million votes and may get 70 million votes or more again. So sadly, it's not just one figure. It's a very important element within our society. But uh, one of the great pioneers of political prediction, Samuel Bell, once said many decades ago, the one thing you can't fight against is birth rates. And we are rapidly moving towards a majority minority society, that the base of the MAGA movement is a shrinking base. And they really have very much depended upon non-majoritarian institutions like the Electoral College and the Senate. But they're fighting against birth rates, immigration rates, and that's tough.
Member Mary McHugh says, Do you think Steve Bannon will make a difference in Trump's campaign now that he's been released from jail?
I don't see how it could be any more vile. I mean, Steve Bannon is one of the most vile political figures in modern times, but I don't see how he could, change the tilt of the Trump campaign.
Member Kasra91 says, What are your thoughts on ballot box fires? Could it impact the election in any conceivable way?
If it's significant enough, conceivably in the swing states, this is another form of voter suppression. What better way to cancel out people's votes than to burn them up? And the MAGA crowd will do anything conceivable to regain power. Do you remember my one sentence description of all of American politics?
Democrats have no spine, Republicans have no morals, or something like that.
No principles,
Principles,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
Janelle M says, What are your thoughts on Mark Cuban's campaign on behalf of Harris? Do you think he's doing a good job at getting the message out there?
I liked Mark Cuban a lot. I think he's a very effective messenger. But again, I've got to keep reminding everyone my predictions don't depend upon any of these campaign events. How many do we have viewing us now?
13,000.
Awesome.
That's
So I'm willing to go a little over time because we have such a robust audience.
that's awesome. I think it's close to our peak ever, I think.
I think it is.
Um, the Lost Scrapbook says, which of the keys for the selection is least certain and why?
Well, at this point, with just a week to go, they're all pretty certain. I have said earlier the most shaky key was the foreign policy success key because wars are so fluid, so unpredictable. There could be some awful reversal in Ukraine that forfeits that key, but it's not going to happen in a few days.
Right.
How the Yankees doing, Sam?
Let me check. Your
I'm so
Yank
sad about the Yankees.
your Yankees are in big trouble, man.
They're losing.
I'm just saying they're down 3-0.
Oh,
I'm checking the
oh,
score.
they've been horrible.
They're winning 5-4, top of the fifth.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. We have an $80
Really?
donation from Vacuum Tubes for Hi-Fi. They say it is unfortunate certain members of the public are abusing you. It's not your fault, and I fully support you and what you're doing. And I believe in the keys. As for polls, do you trust the polls of people who have already voted? Are there polls like that of people who have already
I
voted?
haven't seen, I'm not sure how, certainly you can't poll. I suppose you can try to find them, people who voted by mail. You could have exit polls for people voting at early voting centers. I haven't seen any of those, although I did see a Marist poll of early voters. I'm not sure how they got it. Maybe they, made enough phone calls to find early voters, and it pretty well matched the gender. And they looked at the Sun Belt states, Georgia, North Carolina, I think Arizona, and they had it pretty much along the same lines as the gender, 55 Dem, 45 Republican.
Andrew Ortiz says, how do the keys work if they haven't changed, yet Kamala was elected without public vote?
Because it's not public vote that elects, well, she wasn't elected, she was nominated. It's the vote of the delegates, and something like 95 to 98% of delegates voted for Harris, and she had no opposition.
Well, also it's based off of the incumbent party. It doesn't matter. The vote of her in the primary doesn't really matter,
Oh, it
right?
does for the incumbent party. It doesn't for the challenging party. The key, the contest key
Right, right,
only
right, right.
applies to the incumbent party,
Right.
as do all the keys except key 13, challenger charisma.
Jim Blower says, have you heard of Jonathan McCurdy at St. Mary's College? I'll be going to a talk with him. He has a model based on random forest plus and claims 80% accuracy. Do you know who this is?
Didn't your mom go to St. Mary's College? Pretty sure
Yes.
she did for a little while anyway. Look, I think I've said this before. Models come and go. I have no faith in any model that doesn't have an extensive record of advance prediction. I don't know this model, but I suspect that 80% success rate is based upon applying the model to past elections, because I haven't heard of this guy having an extensive track record of predicting elections in advance. I don't want to dump on him because I don't know him. I don't know his model. Just as a generic matter, I've seen a lot of these models which claim 80, 90% success, but that's all retrospective. And if you heard me say anything at all over the last many months, I have said maybe dozens of times that I distinguish between the development of the model, which must, of course, focus on past elections. You can't develop a model with unknown future elections, and my future predictions. So my retrospective development is 1860 to 1980. My predictive analysis is 1982 to the present.
Thank you, Triple Play Vintage, for your $100 donation. They just donated $100, Dad. Say thanks.
Nice. Thanks.
Um, what about Christopher Barrod? Speaking of other models, he's an economist who's predicting Trump. Do you know him? What are your thoughts?
I don't know him. Uh, you know, I suspect there are hundreds of wannabe modelers out there, and a lot of them are going to be right just randomly. But unless you have, I would say at least a track record of 3, 4 elections, there's no reason to take a model at all seriously. I'll never forget in 2012, eminent professors, I think it was a university out in Colorado, said, we have a new model. It's predicted, I forget, the last 5 elections or 6. Didn't predict anything. Those were past elections that they applied the model to. And I knew that because I'd never heard of them. If someone had predicted the last 5 or 6 elections, I would have heard of it. So they had predicted nothing. This was their first prediction. They predicted a big Trump landslide against Obama in 2012, and we've never heard from them again.
Junaid Naik says, "What is with the false accusations from people like Alan Dershowitz, Sidney Rosenberg, etc., accusing Harris of caving to the quote pro-Hamas crowd? Also, I have been making a rap song based on your rivalry between you and Nate Silver." Well, if you make that song, we'll play it on the air. But what are your thoughts about this?
Absolutely. Look, opponents will say anything. In this rally, one of the speakers implied she had a pimp and that she was a prostitute. Clearly, obviously, Biden and Harris are not pro-Hamas. They have been, in fact, stauncher on support for aid to Israel than Republicans under Mike Johnson have been in the Congress.
Right. Let's see. A lot of these are repeats. Miles Wolf says early voting surpassed 2016, but still down from 2020. Do you predict that we will see lower turnout even when in person is added?
I'm not predicting turnout. My model doesn't do that, but I'm not surprised that early voting should be down to 20 from 2020. That was the pandemic, and a lot of people wanted to vote by mail and not go to the polls because they were afraid of COVID. But aside from the COVID election, early voting is extremely robust this year, particularly as we saw in the swing states. What was it? North Carolina? Already, I think more than half of the likely turnout has already voted.
That's a lot of people.
3.1 million, I think.
Puya Shogi says, "Do you ever assign probabilities to key-based predictions, i.e., saying one cycle's winner prediction is more likely? And if you were to do that, how'd your Kamala prediction compare to past predictions?"
Well, since I don't do that, I can't answer the second part of the question. And, you've heard me discourse on this before. The pollsters give you probabilities. Nate Silver, depending on the time of day in 2016, said Clinton had a 70 to 80% chance of winning. And I think this year his predictions have gone from like, I don't remember, 60% Harris to 50% Harris, all over the map to 58% Trump. Those are not real probabilities. They're manufactured probabilities. They're based not on the law of large numbers, which is probabilities are based on large numbers of repeated acts. So if you flipped a fair coin 1 million times, it should pretty much fall out 50% heads, 50% tails. But we only have one election, and it hasn't even been held yet. So there is no basis for these probabilities. And, Nate Silver even gives you decimal points, 53.1. Of course, it'll change in the next hour. That just shows they're not real probabilities, they're guesses.
Building on that, obviously the keys don't predict margins, but your sense, are you sensing a Kamala blowout? What do you think?
I don't want to comment on that since the keys don't predict margins. Uh, but I will say it's not where the polls stand, it's where the error in the polls is going. Remember, it's not plus and minus 3%. That's pure statistical error. When you add on people not responding, lying, changing their minds, not knowing who the likely voters are, it at least doubles to plus and minus 6. And so the direction of the era, since the non-statistical era is directional, will decide the election.
Thank you, Judy Flores. They just donated $99.99. They say, thank you for never changing or backing down to the haters. You have relieved our election anxiety. Good work, Dad.
Thank you. It's a heavy responsibility, though,
It is, yeah. How
just one person.
what can I say to de-stress you?
uh, Send me your dog.
Keeks, he's back here.
Dogs are very
Here,
good
hold
for
on.
dressing, aren't they?
Yes, here. Come here, Keeks. 1 second.
All right. He's been so good. He never makes a peep during shows. Oh, there he is. What a good boy.
Here he is.
Say hi to Grampy. He's not saying, but he's definitely a
Loves.
dresser, isn't he?
I can't hear you. 1 second. Hold on.
Oh,
What'd you say?
he's definitely a de-stressor.
What do you have to say to de-stress the people, Keeks? The microphone's right at your right here.
Yeah, this is your moment in the sun,
This is
Keeks.
your moment in the sun, Keeks.
He just thinks I'm so cute, I don't have to say anything.
Exactly.
All
Keeks
right,
say,
we can move on. I said I'd go a little after 10 today.
okay. You de-stress Grampy. Good job. All right.
He did. He did a good job, and he's been so good. He never
One
never
second.
makes noise.
Okay.
He just like lying on his bed.
All right. I'm a mess right now. Sorry.
No problem.
It's a little hard to wrangle a dog in the middle of a show.
I know, but it helped reduce the stress.
Definitely. All right. One of our Discord questions for the night. If you want to join our Discord or our Reddit, the link to those are in the description of this video. Our Discord question is, what will happen when a prevalent third party comes around that challenges the two-party system? Will the keys have to change?
Well, I don't like to answer hypotheticals, and that's a huge hypothetical. I'm no opponent of third parties if, they're righteous. In fact, I was the expert witness in the pivotal Supreme Court case that opened up, at least to a great extent, not fully, ballot access to third parties. Anderson versus Celebrezzi, believe it or not, way back in 1980. But I think I've talked about this before. There are so many reasons why it's so difficult for a third party to really gain traction in this country. So I really haven't thought about changing the keys in that way because I don't foresee that kind of third party arising. It hasn't happened since Republicans versus Democrats began competing in 1860. I will, because I'm a teacher, I will give a little history lesson. Historically, there are actually two kinds of third parties. The ones that I call the perennials, that are based upon some kind of political philosophy, like the Libertarian Party or the Socialist Party. Then, and I would say the Green Party, except Jill Stein has completely corrupted it. And then there are the charismatic parties, that is, parties that are not centered on a particular philosophy, but center around a particular charismatic individual. The most recent example of that is, of course, Ross Perot in 1992, where you can go back to George Wallace in 1968, or Teddy Roosevelt in 1912. But none of those individually oriented movements had any staying power. But they get many more votes than the perennials, but the perennials have staying power.
Right. Member Austin Lee says, do you think Democrats will hold the Senate?
I have no idea. I don't have a model for that, and I don't like to opine if I don't have a scientific basis. But it's really tight, really close. It's going to come down to a few elections. But this is a terrible map for Democrats. They're defending a lot of really tough seats like Ohio, Montana, West Virginia, and Republicans really aren't defending too many tough seats. So the one huge surprise is Nebraska. You know what's going on in Nebraska, Sam?
Yeah, there's some like independent guy running, right? Who's
Yeah,
way,
against
yeah.
this nobody Republican who's no one's ever heard of, never done anything. And if you believe the polls, uh, it's it's a close race. I don't think he's going to win, but stranger things have happened.
Um, Ian Magawan says, "Do you believe that Vice President Kamala Harris has the potential to break Buchanan's curse by being the first Democrat elected to directly succeed another Democrat in the presidency since 1861?" Have you
I
heard of
don't
that?
follow that.
I
Harry
don't either.
Truman, succeeded Franklin Roosevelt. Lyndon Johnson succeeded Kennedy. Do you mean the first Democratic vice president to directly win the presidency since Buchanan? I think, but Buchanan wasn't a vice president, so I'm not sure what the question is.
Roger that. I don't know either. David Cott says, if after the fact the third party candidate gets more than 5%, would that key turn? And vice versa, in 2016, the third party key actually failed. Johnson got less than 5%. Wouldn't that change the prediction for Hillary Clinton?
No, the prediction is based upon the polling numbers, and there were more than enough keys against the incumbent party, even no matter how you want to parse the third party key. Check out my book, it lays out the keys.
Steve Bob JD says, what's the origin of the Republicans lack principles saying?
Of the Republican what?
The Republicans, you're saying Republicans lack principles?
Just look at what they've been doing, trying to overturn a free and fair election, not to uphold some great principle, but just to keep Donald Trump in power. Look what they've said today. We've never had candidates like this saying, we're not going to accept an election. I mean, not in so many words, but they made it clear unless we win. That is, I think the most egregious example of a quest for power absent principle.
Remember, how many more questions do you want? We're over an hour now.
Oh, three more?
Three more. There's good news. If you want to keep hanging out and talking, you can join me on the Lichtman Live post show on my channel at Sammy Licht. I know a lot of people in the chat don't like. But when I was fighting you on that messaging behind Trump, I got a lot of hate in the chat. People were saying, "Oh, Sam's MAGA now." Sam,
Oh,
I
God.
know.
I get people saying, Sam needs to be more respectful of his old man. Absolutely not. He's
I'm allowed
fine.
to disagree with him, and obviously, I 1000% believe that Trump and his allies' rhetoric is the most vile rhetoric that's ever existed in American politics. All I was talking about is the messaging
Whether it's
behind.
effective, I know. I
Right.
get
That's
it.
all I was saying. I was not.
All you were saying.
Yes.
What the strategy should be. You were not defending Trump in any way.
Correct.
I got that. Even though I'm old and doddering, even I got that.
Wow. Member Danny Lazar says, hello, Professor. Recently, I've noticed you talking a lot about Mr. Garland and how cowardly on prosecuting Trump for his crimes. Do you think Mr. Sullivan was also too big of a coward in regards to U.S. policy on Ukraine? I've heard many experts say that if the U.S. had provided military aid sooner, that Ukraine would have been able to push Russia out before they built their defenses.
Yeah, I am an expert on the legal system. I've been an expert witness in 110 cases and on politics. I am not an expert in military tactics, so I can't answer the second part of the question.
Gotcha. Just so you know, I know a lot of people have paid questions. We can't get to everybody's question. I apologize. Some of them are repeats. Some of them, there's just too many. We don't have enough time in the day to get to
And we are
everybody's
going
questions.
overtime, so
Right.
all right, two more questions.
All right. Let's see. I'm searching for the best
While you're
questions.
looking, I just got a really interesting invitation in light of what happened at the Madison Square Garden rally about Puerto Ricans. I just got invited to do an interview on the CNN en Espanol, the Spanish CNN, Spanish language. That should be really interesting.
You don't speak Spanish though.
I think they'll let me speak English
Oh.
and translate.
NPA Z77 says, with our judicial system operating on precedent, how will it be possible to overturn the court's decision like the termination of Roe and immunity?
Well, this court has made it clear that they don't operate on precedent. Obviously, they were not operating on precedent with the incredibly significant Dobbs decision that overturned Roe versus Wade. There had been, you know, 50 years of precedent upholding Roe versus Wade, and they just threw it out, rejected it. They didn't operate on precedent when they ruled for the first time that the Second Amendment guaranteed an individual right to keep and bear arms, not a right to keep and bear arms tied to a well-regulated militia. So the idea of precedent has been shattered by this court.
Not good, right?
No. But, some liberal courts have overturned precedent too, but not in the same way. Obviously, the Brown versus Education decision in 1954 that outlawed school segregation under the 14th Amendment overturned the 1896 separate but equal decision of Plessy versus Ferguson. But they explained, what had changed since the era of the late 19th century.
Um, Member Rob Knott says, so I got a copy of Predicting the Next President. It makes a lot of sense. I hope this isn't the first year it doesn't work. I watched Kamala Harris speak tonight, and she looked like a star. She looked very presidential, but according to your approach, it makes no difference. Does Professor Lichtman ever enjoy the horse race, even though he believes it makes no difference?
Oh, I always enjoy the campaigns. I follow them, although not as closely as the pundits. And while the campaigns may not affect my prediction, they certainly affect, as you've heard me so many times on this live show, they affect my assessment of the candidates and what their election would mean for the future of our country. That has nothing to do with my predictions. I didn't like Trump any better in 2016 than I like him now, but I still predicted his win in 2016 because that's what the keys were telling me. I was certainly no Ronald Reagan fan in 1982, but I predicted his win because that's what the keys were telling me. The keys are strictly nonpartisan.
Member Dublin 9143 says, in 2016 and 2020, Trump overperformed the polls. Do you think that will happen again this year? Why or why not?
Yeah, I've talked about that a lot. In previous elections, the polls underestimated Republican voting strength. And like generals fighting the last war, they've tried to correct that. And based on elections from the midterms of 2022 to the specials of 2024, the polls seem to be now in reverse, underestimating Democratic voting strength. The marquee special election, of course, was the New York State congressional election for the seat previously held by the expelled, disgraced George Santos, a swing district won by a Republican the last time. And a poll taken right at the eve of the election had it as a dead heat. Democrat ahead by an insignificant 1 point. The Democrat won by 8 points, outperforming the polls by 7 points. And there have been indications of that in other states like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Kentucky.
Right. All right, that was three more questions, right or no? How
I'll
many?
take one more if you got a good one.
All right, I'll open it
One's
up.
going to have to struggle.
I'll open it up to the chat.
One more.
If there's any non-donation, non-members out there who want to get a question in, put it in the chat. I will try to get it.
Not repetitive.
I try. It's hard.
I know
Sometimes.
you've done a good job of sorting through repetitive questions.
Thank you. Sometimes I forget even what was asked earlier.
I know.
Let's see. Now it's moving too quickly.
All right, we got it. We got to move, Sam.
All right. Some says how negatively. No, we've answered that before. Uh, does Colin Allred have a chance in Texas against Ted Cruz? What do you think?
Great question. For 20 years, I've done a lot of civil rights cases in Texas, mostly unsuccessful, as you can imagine. For 20 years, I've been hearing, well, Texas may not turn blue, but it's going to turn purple when the Latinos start voting and voting heavily Democratic. 20 years I've heard this. How many Democrats during that 20-year period up to right now have won a statewide election, Sam, in Texas?
None.
Zero. So uh, I'm very reluctant to predict that. As reprehensible as Ted Cruz is, he's the most hated man in the Senate. One Republican, I think it was, I'm not certain of that, but at least one member said, if someone shot Ted Cruz on the floor of the Senate, no one would testify. That's how disliked he is. But, I'm reluctant to say any Republican is going to lose a statewide election in Texas. But if it's going to happen, this is a good one.
Yeah, I think from what I saw, the Senate's going to come down to Ohio, Montana, Nebraska, Texas, I believe. Those four.
Ohio, Montana, West Virginia. Yeah. West Virginia's gone.
No,
It's going
no,
to go
not West
public.
Virginia.
Yeah.
Ohio,
Yes.
Montana,
Yes.
Nebraska, Texas.
And West Virginia.
But you just said it's gone.
Well, but it's, yeah.
It's close
Okay.
enough, you're saying?
No, it's not close. I'm just saying that's going to be counted automatically pretty much against the Democrats. So
Gotcha.
that's going to, so that you're starting 50-50 and you have much more difficult seats to hold.
Right. It's going to be tough for sure. All right. We've been going for almost an hour, 15 minutes. With that, we will start wrapping up. The good news, if you want to keep chatting, the Lichtman Life post show, the link to that is pinned to the chat. We will be live on election day and night, right, Dad? On Lichtman
Yes, we're
Live.
going to go all day and night on election day. And we'll, of course, have our regular show on Thursday, just a few days before the election, in which we'll have all the updates and all the analyses for you. But I hate to say this because it may drain some drama. Don't expect the keys to change.
Right. What about, would you do on Thursday, would you do a map? Not,
Yes, we can do that.
you want to do a map on Thursday? All right.
Sure.
It can be, obviously it's an unofficial, not serious prediction, but it's just
Oh,
a,
of course, it's unofficial. We have
right.
no power.
Well, I'm just saying there's a gut map, like what your gut is telling you.
Oh, not yeah, because the keys don't track
Right.
individual
Right.
states, and I've been blasted about that, but I don't want to get into that.
Right. Well, all right. There's some drama. If you tune in on Thursday,
There's going to be a lot of drama then.
Allan Lichtman will do his map. That's
So how
pretty
many
exciting.
we finally have viewing?
How many? I don't understand that.
We
Like
are
how many?
viewing right now.
Still 12,000.
Great.
Great.
All right,
All
we're
right.
done.
What's your
Drama on Thursday.
wait? You got to give your final word to the people, Dad.
My
Relieve
final,
it. Relieve their anxiety.
yes. Don't get caught up in the day-to-day. Don't worry about the polls and the pundits. Only keep your eye on the keys.
All right. See you all in the Lichtman Live post show. Say good night, Dad.
Good night. See you for drama on Thursday.